Welcome to Encouragement for Living Life with Lockwood and Lockwood. The guys are here to encourage you in your attempt to live more confidently and successfully in our world. They are highly trained and experienced mental health professionals, but they are not your mental health professional. They are sharing encouragement through information and discussion. People are complex. Just because an idea helps one person doesn't mean it will help someone else. You need to consult with your own professional who will hopefully know what is best for you and your situation. Now, it's time for Lockwood and Lockwood.
Hi, everybody. Good to be with you again. We're going to talk about one of the more popular topics that people have in the world. And then the next one, an even more popular topic, but both are pretty popular. And this one is borderline personality disorder, what it is, and how to treat it. And but what I want to say for our listeners first, before we get into that, and we're going to get real specific and slow down and take our time and explain things so you understand it in a language that makes sense to you, because some of this stuff's going to be technical. But I want to say first that I just recently realized, because all I've ever done with podcasts is watch them on my computer and listen on my computer. I didn't realize that many people only listen. So I'm over here nodding, and no one's hearing anything from me when I'm nodding, acknowledging what Dr. Lockwood's saying or agreeing with him with what he's saying. So I just want to apologize for that. I'm going to try and speak as well as nod.
Yeah.
All right. Now, so I'm going to read some things. I'm not a guy that remembers a lot of stuff. And when I do an assessment of somebody, I'll listen to them tell their life story and then how they interact with me. We'll get some cues. And then if I need a diagnosis, I'll go to the DSM. That's our diagnostic manual.
Sure.
And I'll look at the symptoms and see what I heard in a session. That's how I do it. So I don't have a rote memory of these. So I want to read them to you, then we'll explain them, make sure they're clear.
Okay.
All right, first the definition of a borderline personality disorder. A pervasive pattern of instability of interpersonal relationships, self-image, affects, and marked impulsivity beginning by early adulthood, and presenting in a variety of contexts as indicated by the following, at least 5 of the following symptoms. Now, we're going to go through the symptoms, and some may be obvious to you, some may not be obvious. Like number 1, frantic efforts to avoid real or imagined abandonment. You may not see their efforts as frantic, but I'll guarantee you under the surface they're going to do anything in a relationship to make sure they're not abandoned. See, so you may not identify with that frantic. You may not see overt frantic. You can see overt frantic behavior. I certainly have seen it, in sessions, and but a lot of times it's more subtle than that. But it's like the duck with the feet going underwater, moving 100 miles an hour, trying to make sure that they're not abandoned. But on the surface you see a kind of a calm looking duck, or he's going about fishing or something like that. That's number 1. 2, a pattern of unstable and intense interpersonal relationships characterized by alternating between extremes of idealization of the person, you're wonderful, you're everything, you're godlike to me, and the opposite extreme, devaluation. You're not worth much at all. You know. 3, identity disturbance. Markedly and persistently unstable self-image or sense of self. What that means is some days they can really feel good about themselves, and other days they just feel like a piece of what. And you're like trying to follow them. You're in a relationship, you're kind of go, where'd your self-worth go? You had self-worth just a minute ago, feel really good about yourself, and now all of a sudden you're nothing. Number 4, impulsivity in at least 2 areas that are self-damaging, like spending, sex, substance abuse, reckless driving, binge eating. Can you think of any others?
Yeah, I think a lot of people will engage in reckless behavior with gambling, with, like, this is going to sound silly, but I think a lot of people have very reckless behavior with regard to social media, for instance. They'll be very impulsive to just have like a very cavalier relationship with what they're posting and things like that on Instagram and Twitter and things like that.
So it can be impulsive or reckless too. That's a good one. That's a more recent one we could talk about because of cultural change.
Yep.
All right, next one. Recurrent suicidal behavior
Mm-hmm.
Either gestures or threats, or self-mutilating behavior. That's the cutting, pinching, hitting oneself,
Burning.
burning, burning. And even over in Europe for a while, the people were falling off of buildings downstairs to hurt themselves intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
Those kind of things. And then affective, meaning their presentation of their feelings, how they come across, instability due to marked reactivity of mood. They have moods that are all over the place that usually only last a few hours to maybe a few days at most. But their moods, you're with them, their moods are all over the place. Sometimes you're going, what the hell's going on? But it's reactive mood, not
Mm-hmm.
stable mood. Chronic feelings of emptiness, and that's really an important one. To me, this is a key one too,
Yeah.
because the emptiness is the things that are missing inside them that lead to a lot of the symptoms we just went through. And the more the emptiness is addressed, the more these symptoms settle down and they begin to look more and more stable as people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then inappropriate, intense anger or difficulty controlling anger. So they have a temper, sometimes physical, can be violent. And then in the last one, transient stress-related paranoid ideation and severe dissociative symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
So they check out. That's the dissociative part. And paranoid, you'll know it if they're paranoid. They'll be paranoid about what you're doing, why you're doing it, what the boss is doing, why they're doing it. They lose perspective and literally become paranoid. I'd say right on the borderline of delusional. And sometimes they come across as delusional.
Yes.
Okay, and we'll get into that more as we go on. So those are the symptoms of the borderline personality disorder as diagnosed by medical authorities. Those are the symptoms I use when someone needs to use insurance, for treatment. So we'll look through the symptoms, see if that diagnosis applies. And it's pretty easy to make the diagnosis when you only have to have 5 of those symptoms. Anyway, so now I want to get into causes. What causes someone to develop a borderline personality disorder? This is really important. In a way, it's simple. In a way, it's very complex. Or intense, maybe is a better word for that. Disorganized early attachment. What a disorganized attachment is a detachment that is not reliable. It's unpredictable with the maternal figure. That's mom. And then there's attachment relationships, prolonged periods of physical, emotional, and/or sexual abuse in early childhood, early development. And this also includes a pervasive, intense sense of neglect, which can feel just as damaging and harmful to a child. I always like to put that one in there because kids can feel overwhelmed by neglect too when it's extreme.
Sure.
Okay. And a big one, they get rewarded for regression, which means they get rewarded for acting feeble, incapable. And when they try to activate the real self, be confident, have courage, confidence, they're withdrawn from, they're withheld from. So what gets rewarded is them becoming clingy, and that's one of the reasons they fear abandonment. Very powerful dyad dynamic, usually with the mother in early childhood, and persistent too. It has to be persistent. Now I have a section that I think might be interesting to people too, son, and that's key features of the borderline personality disorder. And some of this is like symptoms, some of this is just more descriptive to help people identify. Difficulty with self-regulation, diffuse sense of self, use of other people. This is the key. Use of other people in attempts to regulate their self. So that's why a borderline often attaches to, the old joke, if you find a borderline, they may be married to a narcissistic personality disorder. Yeah. Well, they attach to powerful figures so they feel stable.
Yeah.
Because their own sense of self is very fragile and unstable, very needy. And their central affects or feelings or sense about themselves is they feel an emptiness, confusion, loss, desperation, betrayal, and paranoid thinking, which we already touched on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Oh, pathogenic beliefs about the self. I am unlovable. I am helpless when I'm alone, which is about the abandonment. Unlovable means they have a deep sense of, if you don't get what you need, you have a stable attachment where your self needs are supplied well, reliably well, then you may end up feeling unlovable. Like something's wrong with you, you must be unlovable. And they have pathogenic beliefs about others. They have weird beliefs about others. Other people are either all good or all bad. There's your black and white. You know, people talk about borderlines want to talk about that. God, I'm all of a sudden I was first it's like I was everything good. Now it's like I'm nothing good. You know, which can be really confusing and distressing to a spouse or or a close significant other. And their defenses, the defense system they use, and these are psychological defenses. And remember, defenses happen spontaneously and unconsciously typically.
They're reflexes. Defenses are reflexes.
Yeah, to protect, right?
Yeah, just like reflexes are.
Right, yeah. So splitting. Well, you split either all good or all bad as an example of splitting. When you need to have both all good and bad together, and because people are mostly gray, not black or white.
Right.
We're a mixture of qualities, and but not extreme all good or all bad. Right. You know, so mind's ability to split is a protective mechanism. Projective identification. All of a sudden, you're projecting into the other person what you believe really about yourself, and a lot of that can come with paranoia. You know, you're projecting, oh my God, you're going to abandon me. You know, when they're doing nothing to indicate that they're going to abandon you, but they project all these things about what happened to them maybe early in life. You know, that's what we call it, introjects, really. And it can be really distressing to a spouse or a significant other because they're trying to make you out to be someone that's going to leave them, someone that's going to hurt them or is hurting them when you're not doing those things. Mm-hmm. And be very distressing to people around them. Mm-hmm. What else here? I also added denial as a definite defense with a borderline. Yeah, disassociation, of course, where you check out, you're just mentally checked out, or using something to disassociate. It could be anything from music to TV to food to whatever to disassociate, or just daydreaming. And devaluation can be a defense too, obviously.
That's part of splitting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then this general area I think is real important for people. Analytic people, and we might have talked about this before, recognize three general categories of people that we treat. There's neurotic level, which are like, I have a self-esteem problem. I have some problem with security. It's not terrifically bad. It caused me maybe some interference in my life and is highly treatable. Then we have this next area is called the borderline area. It's not the borderline personality disorder.
It's different.
It's the borderline area that probably all personality disorders go under. You know, and these are people that have severe damage from early childhood developmentally. And so they have real problems with dealing with life. You know, and there's all kinds of personality disorders, and we'll touch on many of them as we go on with this. We just picked out the two big ones people talk the most about and are most interested in right now. You know, so anyway, so that's but there are many variations of these things. There are identity confusion, primitive defenses. These early defenses are you like splitting, denial, things like that are used in all these people that have borderline pathology. And if you think about borderline pathology, the next phase, the other group, are psychosis. So in moments, someone in the borderline category can be psychotic. They can literally become delusional, maybe even under enough stress, hallucinate temporarily. It's really temporary, but they can. Even intensive treatment can cause a stress that allows them to become delusional too, and the paranoid projection identifications come out. You know, which I like because it makes them useful to deal with. You're seeing me as what? I'm like, and is that really true? You know, so we'll talk about Kernberg later. But they still have the ability that the borderline group still has the ability to be reflective, think about themselves, what's going on with themselves. Whereas a psychotic person, that's really hard for them to do. So they can be way out there. And as my son, Dr. Lockwood, has said to you, I deal with the whole area of borderline pathology, and usually on the end closest to psychosis, but not psychosis.
Yeah.
Therapists would love to get all the neurotic people in. They're easy to treat. Take any kind of treatment, they'll work. It'll work great with neurotic level pathology.
Yeah.
All right. You want to work on your self worth? I can help you work on your self worth. You want to work on security?
Yeah.
Fine. But when these primitive defenses are present, you may not even know parts of the personality that you're even dealing with for quite a while, because they may be split off and hidden from the ability to work with, and that's why the treatments can be very complex and very long. And as I like to say, I don't use a squirt gun on a house fire, and you've heard me say it. You'll hear me say it again. And with these people, I had someone in here yesterday, and they were looking at me and saying, well, do you think my son should get intensive treatment? I said, yeah, I'd only see this kid 3 times a week would be the least I'd see him, because of how extreme the issues are with them. And he went, okay, yeah, he kind of gets it, because they tried once a week for 4 years, and it didn't dent it. And I think the kid left treatment because of shame, and the dynamics that were going on that may or may not, they may have been understood, but I'm guessing shame got them out of treatment. They quit. Every time they went, they started feeling bad. The more they explored themselves,
Sure.
it made them feel bad instead of better. And shame can be a big stopper of treatment if you don't get on the shame right away and help people see the shame. I had a patient recently cut down number of sessions, I believe, because of shame. The pathology is extreme, and you could use another session to grow, do some growing and some healing, but he needed to feel like he was making progress, that he was more okay, meaning he wasn't as bad or defective. See? And it can really affect treatment if you're not aware of it and can deal with it. And I could only do so much with it before I had to just support him for cutting down and just acknowledge the growth he's made. Maybe we'll come back to it sometime. I don't know. We'll see what happens. All right. Now, do you have anything to add on cause, symptoms, all that kind of stuff?
Dozens of things to say.
Go
I'll try
for
to
it.
I'll try to be
There's a lot.
extremely I'll try to be brief, because you're missing like half of the picture at least.
Well, hey,
So
son, give me a break now, because I started reading the literature again, and I went, oh my God, this is like it's bottomless. And I
I
started
want
going,
you
I can't read all this literature for this
I want
podcast.
I want everyone to hear you loud and clear about what you just said. So So as someone who lives in literature, because I teach this stuff and I supervise about this stuff, I try to stay as up to date as possible,
Cool.
because a lot has evolved since the 80s and 90s when you were more deep in things. And so, you know, let's
Okay.
let's make sure we plant a couple of flags so people can come back and reference things. So they're clear about
Absolutely.
let's organize this for people, you know what I mean? Because we're talking about like so many complicated things, so like
Absolutely.
let's create a
And this
table of
stuff is
contents here.
complicated. When you're with
Yeah, yeah.
someone who's got this pathology, you got to
Yeah,
learn to deal with it.
it's really complicated. So like let's create a table of contents for people, right? So in this episode, we're talking so far about 3 very different things, right? So we're talking about a diagnosable personality disorder, which is one different separate thing from how are you organized as a person, your personality organization, right? And you're
Right.
talking about levels of functioning when you talk about neurotic, borderline, and psychotic, right? And
Absolutely.
so I want everyone to understand that those 2 things are entirely separate, even though the word borderline is used in both
Well, no, actually, there's
places.
great overlap.
But no, 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 let me finish. I got a
Okay.
lot to say. Just let me finish. Okay.
Go for it.
So, just to be clear, right? So, you're talking about one separate thing, which is a disorder, which is a discrete category. It's a box
That everybody
where
wants to know about. Right.
that everyone wants to know about. But then
Right.
you're also trying to explain things from a psychoanalytic or dynamic perspective by talking about this thing called level of personality functioning,
Yes.
right? And
Yeah.
so I want everyone to think of that as a spectrum.
It
And
is a
it's and it's
spectrum.
And it's not a rigid spectrum where you live in
No.
one place. It's a spectrum that you can actually move back and forth on depending upon stress and trauma, early childhood, genetics, all sorts of things. So there's dozens of reasons why you might fluctuate on the spectrum given
Well, let me give an
circumstances.
example of that. Somebody is psychotic. I don't treat psychosis, but I did evaluate a guy and saw him a couple times.
Sure.
And just by being very calm with him and supportive with him, his fear level dropped and his paranoia eased away. So he would then look less psychotic. He certainly was because they were ready to put him in the hospital. And anyway, but I won't go into the story, but because well, maybe sometime we talk about that. But that's an example. Now he looks more in the borderline category. See, because the delusions eased off. He looked very differently at that point.
It's not a category, though. I want everyone to be
Well, I
clear.
know you want to know people's on a continuum,
Yes,
right?
because
Right.
even if
I
you
get it.
read Kernberg and people before Kernberg, they were clear that this continuum is intentionally flexible
Right.
we
Right.
because people's internal states are not static. It's not like we have arrived and then we're done. Most people's developmental experiences are ongoing. That's why therapy works for a lot of people, number
Amen.
one.
Right.
But number
Right.
two, the human personality is not this rigid box-like thing that just it's not like buying a car where it's like once you have a Corvette, you're always a Corvette, just so we're clear. Right? Which is going to sound contradictory to something else I'm about to say, but we'll get to that in a second. But I want
All
people to
right.
understand
Go
that your
slow. Go
person
slow.
like just using the car metaphor, your personality is like swapping out different types of engines and suspensions. You can have the body of a Ford F-150, but you could put a Corvette engine in there if you really wanted to. You can lift it and put giant tires on it, and it looks radically different than the thing it was when it came out of the factory. And that's closer to a better
Right.
understanding of personality than you're this thing at this static stage, if that makes sense. So
Right.
that's
Actually, the model when you have neurotic, borderline, and psychotic, the areas are big for each one, which shows that it's a continuum.
correct.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So we're talking about a disorder on the one hand, and on the other hand, we're talking about a continuum of normal human functioning, just so we're clear. Not necessarily even pathological functioning, because even an ordinary person that doesn't have some major childhood stuff can become psychotic under enough stress, right? So there is no like perfect person who stays in the land of neurosis for the rest of their life, just so everyone's clear.
Well, no.
Like these are
An example of this would be trauma. You can take someone with a secure attachment growing up, and they can still become traumatized. Now, they're
Yeah,
much more resistant to trauma, but they can become traumatized if enough things are going on where they feel helpless long enough. Like
absolutely.
like
Yeah.
torture.
Yeah,
A good example,
100%.
you know.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're going to dissociate if you're being tortured, even if you're the
Yeah.
smartest, strongest person on the planet.
And it's
So,
going to register deep in that brain of yours and stay there.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
those are two different things. And then let's talk about
Yeah.
causes because I think this is very complicated and
Oh
are going to
my
hear
God. I
people are
gave
going
you
to hear
this
what you
much
said.
of
I know.
books
I
and
know.
books and
Yeah.
journal
People are going to
articles.
hear what you said. And basically, people are going to hear what you
Yeah.
said. They're going to think you're blaming mom. And I want to be very clear about this because I don't think that this is something you spend a lot of time reading. So, just to add a couple of things, right? So, if you actually look at the literature, we try to look at all the reasons why people develop different problems, right? We try to look at a complicated matrix of things. And so for
Well,
most
yeah.
personality disorders, it's usually like five or six things at once, just to be clear. Now, with certain disorders, it's a little more cut and dry than others, right? And so borderline and narcissism actually happen to be a little more cut and dried compared to other personality disorders. And so some of this is contrary to the psychoanalytic worldview, just so we're all clear. So of the personality disorders, narcissistic and borderline are the most heritable, just to be clear. And so, what that tells us is it tells us three different things. It doesn't tell us one thing. It doesn't mean it's caused by genes, just to be clear.
You are in your good spot, man.
Yeah, this is my sweet spot. So,
Yeah. Yeah. You're a
what this tells
professor.
us,
Yeah.
what this actually tells us, it doesn't tell us that your genes cause this, but what this tells us is that if you have a more heritable condition, What that means is you are built differently from the jump. Before mom can traumatize you or dad can abuse you or anything like that, what that means is something is different about your central nervous system. We call it temperament when we're talking developmental psychology, but you are born differently than like there's not like some perfect blank slate kid who's just like
Well,
completely
you're
neutral
you're
or
right.
something.
We're right. Slow down. When I was talking to that parent about that child, that boy,
Yeah.
little boy,
Yeah.
there was something different about him because he was the father wondered why did mom not connect with him the way she did with the other kids. Well, I
Sure.
can just sense by listening to the story that this kid is neurologically temperament, personality, something different
Yeah.
that made it much more difficult to be connected with by the mother. Because I said to
Right.
him, as a matter of fact, for people listening, so that I'm not blaming moms, that I think this is a very good mom, actually.
Yes.
And so something was different that didn't allow the connection to work. And that's one of the reasons this young man wanted to go see a woman
Right.
therapist, too, I think.
Exactly. The example you're giving is a perfect example of what I'm talking about, which is a lot of the times when people hear about psychoanalytic or psychodynamic things, they think it's just boring misogyny. We're blaming mom or something like that. The truth of the matter is, expert clinicians are trying to look at this really complicated dance, right? Because if you're built a certain type of way from birth, not like something bad happened in the womb or something bad happened at 6 months. Like from day zero, you are unable to be soothed as an infant. That's a real thing that exists, by the way. That's
Yeah,
not some like,
soothing's one thing, but it's not the only thing
it's
that
not the
forms
only
good
thing.
attachment. But
I'm
yeah,
just giving
yeah,
an
yeah.
example, right?
Yeah, it
And
is a good
so,
example. Yeah.
so what I'm talking about is like you could be built so differently that even with the best of parents and circumstances and all these things, you're still not able to be soothed consistently. And so, what we know about BPD now compared to 30 or 40 years ago is that there are two or three things that go wrong developmentally that have less to do with parents and more to do with a resistant nervous system that is not capable of taking in the feedback that even great parents are trying to give this infant. And just to speak to causality number two, right? So that's number one is there's a genetic thing that people rarely talk about,
Say
which
that
makes
again.
yeah, yeah. So
Nervous
number
system.
number one is people with BPD on average have this heritability. They've inherited a difficulty with being soothed and regulated that has nothing to do with how good or bad the parents are. Number one. That's not something you can like take vitamin D about or whatever to produce a better infant in the womb. Just to work there.
Right.
Number
Right.
two, equally important. So if number one is even remotely true, this actually helps explain that thing you were talking about earlier when you were talking about the symptoms. So this
Yeah.
unstable self-concept, right? So our self-concept is not static. It's changing. It changes over
Of
life.
course.
It
Of course.
usually starts to get more complicated in the first 8 years of life. But what
Mm-hmm.
we now know
Right.
is that if it's hard to regulate yourself, it's hard to stay in reality, right? We know this about
Correct.
young kids and
Correct.
infants, right? So
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
happens, what if we're thinking about causes of BPD, right? What happens is this terrible bad luck mixture of being built differently from the jump, number one, but number two, because you're built differently, even with the best of parents, to actually have the social experiences with mom, dad, friends, and everybody else that help create this thing we call a sense of self, even with the most reliable people on the outside of you, things might not stick, right? And so, because things are not sticking, you don't have this core thing that makes sense to you. If you want to think about a sense of self, just very high level, very simply, a sense of self is just a blueprint in your brain. And sometimes the paper on the blueprint is very slippery. And so that's the problem is that people are trying to help you construct this blueprint in early development, the first 8 years of life. And people
Well,
with
look,
BPD,
look.
can't create the blueprint because sometimes the paper is sticky, sometimes the ink isn't sticky enough. That's the family and the environment.
Well, so there are two types, like this young man I was telling you about earlier, guys. But then I treat people with heavy borderline personality disorder that the family history is replete with forming a chaotic connection
Sure.
because of the abusiveness, the drinking, the
Sure.
and all kinds of things that, or mother who uses the child emotionally. The child feels overwhelmed by being used and then withheld from at the same time. So I see histories where it's less what you're talking about, and it is more the dynamic maternal dynamic, influenced, by the way, by the father. Father can make it better or worse by their involvement. So I get what you're saying, that there's some kids that by an adequate parent, like we call good enough parent, are still not going to get that experience that they need to form a stable identity, to form affective stability, emotional stability, where they have a decent sense of security and self-worth. I get that's true. I see it with people. But the people I do intensive treatment with, boy, there's usually a story in the family that makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, the thing is, though, just to be clear to everyone listening,
Yeah,
there are tons of people that come from very chaotic homes who never
there
turn
are.
out borderline.
Oh no, that's
Millions,
that's true
millions and
too.
millions and millions and millions.
People that
And
go
so,
through abuse, yeah, all
yeah,
kinds of abuse, and
some
still,
people some
yeah,
people just have PTSD. Some people just have attachment insecurity. Some people have other personality issues. So
that's true.
that's why I'm talking so much about early organization for people because when people listen to psychodynamic types, they always blame the environment. And there's just this giant missing link
Well,
of
it's
like
not
maybe you're
blame.
built differently.
It's not blame, but I think you're right that there's something missing about the constitution of the child, like a
Yes.
sensitive nervous system. Like you used colic in the last podcast.
Yeah.
Colic's a great example of a system, the whole body system, because of the digestive tract not developing well or reacting well, that causes great disturbance in the attachment.
Right.
That's very difficult for anyone to
Anyone.
deal with, or just like an
Yes.
autistic child, like my nephew.
Yeah.
Very, very difficult to do it.
And
So
there's nothing that
but
your sister did
analytic
to make him
people
autistic,
focus on
though.
what can be changed, and we also note the patient's own personality, things that get in the way too of
But in
that.
addition to that, what everyone needs to be clear about is oftentimes when analytic people are listening to people, we're also listening to how people construct stories. And so the important thing to remember here with
Right,
all
right,
personality organizations, not just disorders, right? If
right,
we talk about personality style, which is not the same thing as disorder, personality style is a more like loose construct, right?
right. Some people have paranoid personality, some obsessive,
Yeah.
yeah, some
But
hysterical, emotionally based.
depending up,
Yeah.
depending upon how you're built, you will take in information and create a different story about how you were treated too. So a lot of people with narcissistic and antisocial and borderline and all these personality disorders,
Right.
when they were younger and it was just a style, they're created this positive feedback loop where they would interact with the world outside of them and then create stories that aren't real because the other person didn't actually do those things or treat them that way.
Well, I
And
call
so,
that what is the truth? There's three sides to a coin. The
yeah.
head is the environment, tails is the patient, the edge is where the truth is. The interaction of the patient and the
And
truth of
it's
the
and
environment.
it's the thinnest part of it too, by the way. All that other content is noise, you know? And
Oh no, it
so
takes a long time to discern what actually how a person was actually treated versus how they perceive they were treated.
right. So that phrase you just used,
Yeah,
I want everyone to listen to
yeah.
and hear and hold in their brain because there's a great wall of China, especially if you have a personality disorder. There's a literally a great wall of China between how you were treated, like what happened on paper if there was a camera watching you, versus how you experienced how you were treated. And those are not the same thing, especially if you have a personality disorder, right? And so it's
Oh
very
yeah.
important for everyone to understand that
Right.
people with a personality disorder from the jump are often taking in information not realistically, which has nothing to do with how good or bad the parent is. Now, it's made infinitely worse the more your parents suck or are abusive or inconsistent,
So, okay.
right?
Well, I
Clinically
wouldn't put it
speaking.
that way, but yeah, yeah,
Yeah, you know what I mean? So it's like we have this
yeah,
BPD is one of the most challenging conditions. It's actually not that challenging. It's emotionally difficult for people, but it's actually very straightforward. This person doesn't have the capacity to regulate themselves because there's no self there. And that's terrifying for anyone, literally. And that is the core problem. So when we're talking about etiology, the real cause is they were never able to develop this core thing that they could hang their hat on. There's no
yeah.
foundation there.
Right, which is what people like me try and help develop in someone like that, which is quite a challenge. Particularly, you're noting the different personality issues involved with it and the resistance to doing that.
And it's not resistance. They don't quite literally understand what you're trying to do. That's the confusion that a lot of
Well,
analytics types have.
well, we mean something technical by resistance. We don't mean
I
that
know.
they're consciously trying to resist the treatment. They're not. They have a problem with, well, a lot of different things, but I don't want to go into that here. But anyways,
Yeah.
but it's a challenge, and that's why we see people multiple times a week. That's why they're often seen for years, because we're trying to work with a brain, like you're saying, or a background, both, that cause some real resistance to getting what they need to develop a sense of self, where they're not afraid and terrified of abandonment.
Yeah, so
Basically,
the
basically.
abandonment thing is extremely important too, because when people are dating with these types or in friends with them or working with them, because they're often very successful people and they're lawyers and judges and nurses and doctors and all these things.
Oh yeah.
And so having a personality disorder is not some kind of like permanent disability in the sense that you can't do
Oh,
things.
they can
It's
be
often,
extremely talented, extremely successful
yeah. And
people, for
so
sure.
not that their life is easy or good, just that, you're
Their
very
life is
capable
not
often.
easy inside of them.
Yeah.
It's really not.
Yes,
It's very
absolutely.
hard
It's
inside
just it's
them.
tragic inside of them
Yeah.
because they feel pervasively lonely because there's nothing there to relate to, number one,
That's the
inside.
emptiness.
Yeah. And the emptiness is a function of no self, right? So it's the worst version of Buddhism you could possibly imagine. The Buddha talked about no self. He didn't mean it in the sense of like, being chaotic because life doesn't make any sense because there's nothing to reflect life onto. He meant in the sense of like you understand as much as you can and everything is fine and it doesn't matter how separate you are. So that's very different just for everyone. And the other thing I wanted
No,
to say,
no, that's important.
that's radically different because
Yeah.
no self in the personality disorder sense means that again most people their self concept, their image, their blueprint of themselves is what they relate to the world with, right? It's like a mirror as of sorts. And so this is like having a mirror frame with no glass in it, essentially. And the person's desperately trying to find sand to make glass. And so they interact with you in chaotic ways to create heat to make the sand into glass.
Well, like idealizing you. They'll
Yeah.
idealize you because they feel so empty. They need to cling to who you are to feel some sense of stability. So they easily idealize therapists. And when I stop being idealized, I often get somebody stomping out of my room with slamming the door because I go from all good to all bad. And it really helps them grow because I go, well, no one's all good or all bad. You know, so it teaches them something that they really need to have in their brain. There's so much gray that people aren't all good or all bad. You're idealizing me for a reason. Now you're devaluing me for the same reason because you feel so
Yeah.
empty.
Yeah. And it's that's how chaotic it is inside. So when I want people to understand that from the symptoms perspective, a lot of the roller coaster like experience is not because they intentionally want to harm you or they want to make life difficult for you. It's because they literally don't know how to tolerate things. Literally,
They
not
don't know how to
metaphorically.
tolerate separation, abandonment. That's why some of these people, a subgroup of them, can be stalkers.
Yep.
In treatment, they'll often stalk the therapist. I've been stalked before, where they know where I live. You know what I'm saying? It's the clinginess. It's because the abandonment issues. They're terrified of abandonment, and therapists can get in a trap because they'll be idealized, and you got to be very careful when you're idealized to make sure you know you're not ideal. You're just a person doing therapy with them, and why do they need to idealize you? And that's what you're going to end up dealing with, is why they need to idealize you.
Yeah, and you said something that's going to be a passing comment, but it's actually not a passing comment. You said that people with borderline personality disorder often struggle with separation. I want
Oh
to be
boy.
very clear that that's ordinary separation.
Oh
Not
yeah.
even not even extraordinary separation like divorce or death or something. They struggle with like goodbye, I will see you tomorrow. Because for
Uh, uh,
them, there is
yeah.
no tomorrow.
A patient of mine, she said her mom canceled her because she moved with her husband to another state.
Ah,
The mother felt empty, like didn't exist anymore to her. It was so traumatic to her that she canceled her out of her rage. Eventually came around, but it took some years and some help from some other family members for it to change. This is probably a borderline mother, anyway. But yeah, so I hope you guys listening to this understand how complex it is. I think this is just for my son. You guys don't know who Dr. Kernberg is, probably. Some of you might know, they're in the field. But Kernberg would like what you're saying because he saw borderline differently than Kohut did.
yes, he did.
He saw it like, this is early damage, and he just steps right in and tells you what you need to do, personality
Yeah,
wise.
he
What
does.
you
Yeah,
are
yeah.
missing, what you're
Yeah.
missing. And the people I treat that are sicker, I'm more direct with, like Kernberg. You
Yeah.
can't just wait for them to
Yeah.
take in what they need.
Yeah.
They're too damn frightened to take it in, so you got to be more confrontive.
That's why DBT works, by the way. It's extremely direct.
The DBT would work with
Yeah,
sicker type. Yeah.
because it's very direct.
And by the way, we're not going to have time today to talk about treatment,
Yeah.
but trust me, most treatment, the vast majority of treatment for people with borderline personality disorder, it better be professional.
Oh, yeah.
These people are complicated, so we don't have to go into treatment a lot. One-on-one, I couldn't imagine doing a group with borderlines.
It works. It works.
I'm not
It
doing
works.
it. I'm not doing it. Too much to keep track of, but it really needs professional treatment. So if you know someone like that, or you're living with someone like that, get them some good treatment. Good treatment. Find good people. And you know what I say, keep looking if you don't, and ask around and do the research to find the people that are really good at treating it. Because there are
Yeah.
people that are good at treating it. They gotta be smart. They gotta know what's going on and not get sucked in and play out the pathology with the patient.
Yeah.
Which happens a lot with borderlines.
Easily.
Back when I didn't know what I was doing, I kept trying harder and harder to make her okay. And it didn't frickin' work, man. It
Never
didn't
works.
work.
Never works. Well, it gets worse, actually.
Oh, it did actually. So it kept wanting more and more, need more and more. It was
Yep.
a bad cycle, and I learned a lot.
Yeah.
And I got her to somebody that knew what he was doing.
Good.
And he helped her, So anyway, it worked out all right. Although I got a call or two for a while, and I finally just had to not answer the phone, because the abandonment was just horrendous.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah.
Yeah. So if that gives you some flavor about what a borderline personality disorder is, the whole borderline pathology things what people like us talk about versus neurotic versus psychotic, I hope it was some encouragement to you. And no, there's help for people like that. They can grow. They just have to get the people to know what the heck they're doing so they can grow and change. And that's all for today. We hope you enjoyed it, and we certainly enjoyed doing it. Thanks.
Thanks for listening to Encouragement for Living Life. We hope you were encouraged by today's discussion. If you have a question, you can email us at lockwoodwithlockwood@gmail.com. We'll do our best to answer it on one of our shows. Hope to see you next time.